Hello and welcome to the Myschool channel. My name is Angela, and in this video we are going to be tackling the government JAMB question for the year 2001. Please stay with us, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Myschool channel. In this video, we're going to be focusing on questions 26 to 50. Let's begin with question 26. The Central Legislature of Nigeria became bicameral in A. 1960, B. 1951, C. 1959, and D. 1963. The answer to this question is option A. 1960. So the Independence Constitution of Nigeria officially recognized a bicameral central legislature. So in 1960, Nigeria began practicing the bicameral legislature system, whereby power was divided between two houses of the legislature. So it might feel like the answer is 1951 because under the 1951 Macpherson Constitution, there was a bicameral legislature, but it wasn't at the center. It was at the northern and western regions of Nigeria. So in the northern and western region, we had a bicameral legislature, whereby the legislature was divided into the House of Chiefs and House of Assembly. So this was a regional bicameral legislature, not a central one. It was under the Independence Constitution of 1960 that we had a central bicameral legislature. Option A is the answer to this question. Question 27. Which of these constitutions recognized local governments as a third tier of government in Nigeria? A. 1946 Constitution, B. 1960 Constitution, C. 1963 Constitution, and D. 1979 Constitution. The answer to this question is option D. 1979 Constitution. So following the reform of 1976 that was undertaken by General Olusegun Obasanjo, the local government was officially recognized as a third tier of governments. So before then, Nigeria was still practicing that indirect rule system that was gotten from the British colonial administration. So traditional rulers were still ruling the local regions in Nigeria. But however, with the 1976 reform undertaken under General Olusegun Obasanjo, the local government became a more professionalized system, whereby they appointed executive chairman for the local government instead of having a traditional ruler administering the affairs of the local governments. So as a result of that, under the 1979 Republican Constitution that ushered in the Second Republic, we had the local government officially recognized as the third tier of governments. So option D, 1979 Constitution, is the answer to this question. Question 28. Under the 1963 Constitution, items not listed in the exclusive and concurrent list were within the exclusive competence of the A. Executive, B. Federal Parliament, C. Regional Legislatures, and D. Judiciary. The answer to this question is option C, Regional Legislatures. So under the 1963 Constitution, the legislative power was divided into three different lists: the exclusive list, the concurrent list, and the residual list. So the exclusive list is the list of powers and functions that belongs exclusively to the central legislature. The concurrent includes powers and functions that belong to both the central and regional legislature, while the residual list belongs just to the regional legislature. So items in the residual list belonged only to the regional legislature at the time. Although these three terms were introduced under the Littleton Constitution of 1951, it was also under our Republican Constitution of 1963 and helped to divide powers among the central and regional legislature. So option C, regional legislatures, is the answer to this question. Question 29. Before Nigeria became a republic, the highest body charged with the administrator of justice was the A. Privy Council, B. High Court, C. Supreme Court, and D. Court of Appeal. The answer to this question is option A, Privy Council. So before Nigeria became a parliamentary republic, Nigeria was a parliamentary monarchy. It was still under the administration of the head of state of the British Empire. That was at the time Queen Elizabeth II. And for most parliamentary monarchies, they were still under certain administrative units within the British Empire. So in the administration of justice, the highest court of appeal in Nigeria at the time was the Privy Council, which was located in London, England at the time. So whenever all of the other courts fail within the Nigerian system, such cases are brought up before the Privy Council in London. So Nigeria was a parliamentary monarchy at the time. However, in 1963, when Nigeria became a parliamentary republic, Nigeria no longer had that affiliation with the monarchy of the British Empire. So Nigeria created the Supreme Court, which became the highest court of appeal in Nigeria. So the answer to this question is Privy Council, because before 1963, we were still under the administration of the Privy Council in terms of administration of justice. So option A is the answer to this question. Question 30. The equivalent of the commissioner at the local government level is the A, executive chairman, B, secretary, C, councillor, and D, supervisory councillor. The answer to this question is option D, supervisory councillor. So at the local government level, the supervisory councillor is a duplication of the commissioner that we have at the state level and the minister that we have at the federal level. So at the federal level, ministers are appointed by the president to administer the affairs of the various ministries. At the state level, the governor appoints commissioners to administer the affairs of the various ministries at the state level. Then at the local level, the executive chairman, that is the chief of the executive at the local level, appoints supervisory councillors to be in charge of different departments within the local governments in order to ensure that certain things, certain policies are being implemented within that local government. So you can say duplication of function at the federal, state, and local level. So this is what happens here. So this supervisory councillor is appointed by the executive chairman upon the approval of the councillors, which act as the legislature at the local level. So this makes supervisory councillor the answer to this question. Question 31. The Independent National Electoral Commission has the power to prepare and maintain the register of A, political parties, B, constituencies, C, voters, and D, electoral candidates. The answer to this question is option C, voters. The Independent National Electoral Commission is the body responsible for conducting election, and before election is conducted, they have to register voters and also maintain and constantly update the register of voters to ensure that all eligible voters are allowed to take part in the election process. So it is the registration of votes, the maintenance of the register of votes, that is the duty of the INEC, the Independent National Electoral Commission. Option C is the answer to this question. Question 32. The President of Nigeria is advised on the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country by the A, National Security Council, B, National Defense Council, C, Council of State, and D, Federal Executive Council. So the answer to this question is option B, National Defense Council. So the National Defense Council is a body that has been created in Nigeria to ensure the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the country. This council consists of the President of Nigeria, the Vice President, the Chief of Defense Staff, the Chief of Army Staff, the Chief of Naval Staff, and the Chief of the Air Force. So all of these people, they come together to discuss how Nigeria can maintain its sovereignty and territorial integrity. So option B, National Defense Council, is the answer to this question. Question 33. The Nigerian youth movement collapsed as a result of A, its failure to win election, B, shortage of funds to run its affairs, C, the harassment of its leadership by government, and D, the breakup of its leadership. The answer to this question is option D, the breakup of its leadership. The Nigerian youth movement, which was created in 1934 as an official opposition to the Nigerian National Democratic Party at the time, was created with the aim of ensuring that every citizen of the country are allowed to participate in the electoral process regardless of their educational status. So that was their main objective. However, as a result of a lot of leadership tussle within the party, the collapse of the Nigerian youth movement was imminent. So the two leaders who had this major leadership tussle was Ernest Ikoli and Samuel Akinsoya. Both of them were vying for the position of party leader, and after the primary election within their political party, Samuel Akinsoya won the favor of the members. However, Ernest Ikoli contested this result, and as a result of that, this election was overturned, and Ernest Ikoli was declared as party leader. As a result of this, and as a result of ethnic tensions within the party as well, a lot of major leaders within the party left that political party, including Samuel Akinsoya, and Nnamdi Azikiwe was also a leader at the time. So the breakup of its leadership is what led to the collapse of the Nigerian youth movement. Option D is the answer to this question. Question 34. The first restructure of the Nigerian Federation took place with the A, creation of Midwest region in 1963, B, abolition of federalism in 1966, C, military counter-coup in 1966, and the creation of states in 1967. The answer to this question is option A, creation of Midwest region in 1963. So this was the first restructure of the Nigerian Federation. In 1963, the Midwest region was created in addition to the three regions that originally existed. That's the Western, Eastern, and Northern region. So the Midwest region was created in order to ensure that the interest of minority groups within the country was also represented. So this was the first restructure of the Nigerian Federation. It can't be the abolition of federalism in 1966 because that is not a restructure. That's the total operating of the federal system. The military counter coup in 1966 also has nothing to do with the Nigerian Federation. The creation of states in 1967 took place much later, and the creation of the Midwest region is the first restructure, as you can see. So option A is the answer to this question. Do you know you can take practice questions with our simulated JAMB CBT past question? All you need to do is to go down to the link in the description below. This takes you to the Myschool website where you can download the Myschool mobile app for your Android devices and the Myschool software for your laptops and computers. Please go ahead and start practicing. Now to question 35. The Land Use Decree of 1978 vested the ownership of land in Nigeria in the A, local chiefs, B, local governments, C, state governments, and D, federal governments. The answer to this question is option C, state governments. So the land within a particular state belongs to the state government. This is according to the Land Use Decree, which was created in 1978. You will see that under section 1, article 1 of this decree. It's also important to note that this Land Use Decree was amended in 2004 and became the Land Use Act. Still, this law about the ownership of land continues to stand under the Land Use Act of 2004. The state government continues to own the land which is within each of the states of the Federation. So option C, state government, is the answer to this question. I believe you're enjoying this content. If yes, please don't forget to hit the like button, click on the subscribe button, and lastly, tap on the notification bell to get informed as soon as we release the next videos. Question 36. The main source of financing local governments in Nigeria is A, internal revenue generation, B, statutory revenue allocation, C, special state grants, and D, grants in aid. The answer to this question is option B, statutory revenue allocation. So this is the main source of financing for local governments in Nigeria. The federal government, by law, has to allocate revenue to each of the local government areas within the country in order for them to be able to perform their duties and to implement policies within their jurisdiction. So the statutory revenue allocation is the major source of fund for the local governments, although they get fund from special state grants and grants in aid. But these are not major sources of finance for the local governments. The major source is the statutory revenue allocation from the federal government. So option B is the answer to this question. Question 37. The most remarkable legacy of the 1976 local government reform in Nigeria was the introduction of A, the office of sole administrators, B, caretaker management committees, C, uniformity in structure and functions, and D, the third tier of government. The answer to this question is option C, uniformity in structure and functions. So after the 1976 local government reform that took place under the administration of General Olusegun Obasanjo, there was the uniformity in structure and functions. Before then, we had traditional rulers who were ruling various local regions within the country. However, with the reform, there was now uniformity across all the states of the Federation. All of these local government areas that were created had a uniform structure, which had an executive chairman as the head of the executive, supervisory councillors that were appointed by the executive chairman, who were in charge of various departments within the local governments. We also had councillors who were performing legislative functions and so many other structures within the local government area. And these structures were uniform across all the local government areas within the country. So the uniformity in structure and functions was the most remarkable legacy of the local government reform in Nigeria. Option C is the answer to this question. Question 38. The Murtala Obasanjo regime in Nigeria increased the number of states from A, 4 to 12, B, 12 to 19, C, 19 to 20, and D, 30 to 36. The answer to this question is option B, 12 to 19. So under the administration of General Murtala Mohammed and his vice, Olusegun Obasanjo, the number of states was increased from 12 states to 19 states. So it was increased from 4 to 12 under Yakubu Gowon. Yakubu Gowon was the first person to stop the regional system that we had and instead replaced it with a state government system. So instead of having the 4 regions in Nigeria, we had 12 states. This happened under General Yakubu Gowon. Then under Murtala and Obasanjo, we had 12 to 19. Then under Ibrahim Babangida, the states were increased from 19 to 30 states. And then under Sani Abacha, we had 30 states to 36 states. So option B, 12 to 19, is the answer to this question. Question 39. The major factor that influenced the formulation of Nigerian foreign policy in the First Republic was A. Geographical location, B. The colonial legacy, C. Economic consideration, and D. The parliamentary system. The answer to this question is option B. The colonial legacy. So the major factor that influenced Nigeria's foreign policy in the First Republic, that's under the administration of Nnamdi Azikiwe as head of state and Alhaji Tafawa Balewa as head of government, was the colonial legacy. They were still trying to maintain relationship with their former colonial master. So as a result of that, most of the foreign policies were directed towards ensuring that there continues to be a relationship between Nigeria and Britain. However, it was after this era, after the First Republic, during the military rule era, that Nigeria began to become more Afrocentric, began to focus on Nigeria's development in context of the African countries. So option B, the colonial legacy, is the answer to this question. Question 40. The Barclays Bank and the British Petroleum Company in Nigeria were nationalized in the late 1970s for transacting business with A. France, B. South Africa, C. Portugal, and D. Libya. The answer to this question is option B, South Africa. So under the administration of General Olusegun Obasanjo in the 1970s, Nigeria decided to nationalize the Barclays Bank and the British Petroleum Company because they were trying to impose sanctions on the British people who were still in support of apartheid South Africa. So we began to see here how Nigeria was beginning to distance itself from their colonial masters. They were beginning to have a voice of their own. And the voice at that time was anti-apartheid. They were trying to work against the apartheid regime in order to stop it in South Africa. So as a result of that, they were trying to get the British people to stop giving aid to South Africa. But since they did not listen to this, they decided to nationalize these companies in order to impose some sort of sanction on the British people. So Barclays Bank now became Union Bank, while the British Petroleum Company became African Petroleum. So all of this was done in order to nationalize this company, to make this company Nigerian rather than British. So option B, South Africa, is the answer to this question. Question 41. South-South cooperation is a major policy plan on which Nigeria bases her relations with A. Developed countries, B. Countries of the Southern Hemisphere, C. Developing countries, and D. Member countries of OAU. The answer to this question is option C, developing countries. So the international community decided to divide the planet into the global north and the global south. So the global north included countries that have already been developed, that have a larger economic system, as opposed to the global south, which was less developed, were developing countries and were still trying to advance their economy. So Nigeria decided to maintain a relationship with the global south, that is the developing countries of the world. These are countries that are in Asia, some parts of Asia, South America, and Africa. They decided to try to exchange technologies, skill sets, and different other things to ensure that these developing countries continue to grow together. So it may feel like option B, countries of the Southern Hemisphere, is the answer. But please note that though most of these developing countries belong to the Southern Hemisphere, there are still some countries in the Southern Hemisphere that belong to the global north. So the difference between the global north and south is one of whether or not they are developed. So if they are developed countries, they belong to the global north, regardless of where they are on the planet, while the developing countries belong to the global south. So option C, developing countries, is the answer to this question. Question 42. Nigeria's recognition of the popular movements for the liberation of Angola to lead that country was made under A. General Yakubu Gowon, B. General Murtala Mohammed, C. General Muhammadu Buhari, and D. General Ibrahim Babangida. The answer to this question is option B, General Murtala Mohammed. So under the administration of General Murtala Mohammed, one of Nigeria's foreign policy was to recognize the popular movement for the liberation of Angola as the official government in Angola. So in Angola, there was this civil war that was going on between 1961 to 1975. The country was split into 3 factions: the MPLA, that's the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola, the FNLA, and UNITA. So these three different factions were vying for leadership of the country. However, Nigeria chose to support the MPLA that was under the leadership of Agostinho Neto, who eventually became the first president of Angola after the civil war. So Nigeria chose to support the MPLA despite pressures from international factions to support other factions. So it was under the leadership of General Murtala Mohammed that this occurred. So option B is the answer to this question. Question 43. The first Nigerian permanent representative to the United Nations was A. Alhaji Yusuf Maitama Sule, B. General Joseph Garba, C. Professor Ibrahim Gambari, and D. Chief Samuel Adebo. So the answer to this question is option D, Chief Samuel Adebo. Although Chief Samuel Adebo was the third Nigerian permanent representative to the United Nations, he is the first of all of these options listed. The first Nigerian permanent representative was Jaja Wachuku, who held the position from 1960 to 61. Chief Samuel Adebo was the third Nigerian permanent representative and held the position from 1962 to 1967. So since he is the first from the option D, Chief Samuel Adebo is the answer to this question. Question 44. In 1981, Nigeria participated in an Organization of African Unity peacekeeping force to replace Libyan forces in A. Somalia, B. Chad, C. Ethiopia, and D. Zaire. The answer to this question is option B, Chad. During that period, Chad was in an internal civil war. There was a lot of internal strife within the country. And the president at the time, Gokoni Wedeyi, needed forces to help in peacekeeping within the country. And as a result of that, it went to the Organization of African Unity for assistance. And they decided to send 5 different countries. They decided to send troops from 5 different countries to assist in the peacekeeping force. So Libya was there before this. And the reason Libya was asked to withdraw from Chad was because Libya was beginning to have interest in certain things within the country. They were beginning to side with one party that was in the disputes. So they felt that if Libya continued to send troops to this region, they would eventually be able to have their way. So as a result of that, they decided to ensure that Libya withdraws their peacekeeping troops, and they brought in more neutral peacekeeping forces from 5 different countries that belong to the Organization of African Union. So option B, Chad, is the answer to this question. Do you have a question? Please feel free to ask your question by going down to the link in the description below. This takes you to my school website where you can ask your question and the solution will be provided to you within a short period of time. Now on to question 45. During the Civil War, the major power that expressed moral support for Biafra's self-determination was A. France, B. China, C. the United States, and D. Great Britain. So the answer to this question is option A, France. So France was a major supporter of Biafra, but they did so by offering humanitarian and moral support to the Biafran people. They allowed non-governmental organizations to enter into the Biafran territory to assist the people. Although they were offering military assistance covertly, their major support was through moral and humanitarian support. So option A, France, is the answer to this question. Do you have a better explanation or solution to any of these questions? If you do, go down to the comment section below, indicate the question number and the solution you would like to share. Question 46. Nigeria's withdrawal from the Edinburgh Commonwealth Games in July 1986 was in protest against British A. support for UNITA rebels in Angola, B. supply of arms to Rhodesia, C. failure to impose sanctions on South Africa, and D. negative utterances on Nigeria. So the answer to this question is option C, failure to impose sanctions on South Africa. So during the 1980s, when the apartheid regime was gaining momentum in South Africa, Nigeria chose to withdraw from the Edinburgh Commonwealth Games in July 1986 as a method of pressuring the British people to stop supporting the apartheid regime that was going on in South Africa. We understand that the apartheid regime led to the oppression of blacks in South Africa, while the whites were enjoying certain privileges. The British people were not ready to stop supporting this regime, and Nigeria was trying to pressure them to stop doing so. And as a result of that, they withdrew from that game. However, the British Prime Minister at the time said that they would not withdraw their support of the South African apartheid regime because they felt that if they do withdraw their support, their economic support from this region, that it is the common people that will suffer and not the governments. But Nigeria continued to pressure the British government in spite of this. So option C, failure to impose sanctions on South Africa is the answer to this question. Question 47. The major demand of the third world countries on the United Nations in recent times is the A, expansion of the permanent membership of the Security Council, B, post of the Secretary General of the organization, C, withdrawal of the veto power from the Security Council, and D, enforcement of resolutions on the superpowers. So the answer to this question is option A, expansion of the permanent membership of the Security Council. So the major demand of the third world countries, that's countries that are still developing, was that the United Nations should expand the permanent membership of the Security Council. So the Security Council of the United Nations is composed of 5 permanent members, which includes Russia, China, United States, United Kingdom, and France. So these 5 countries were permanent members of the Security Council, while there were other non-permanent members that were appointed on a periodic interval. So all of these members of the Security Council were responsible for maintaining international peace and security. But these 5 permanent members had the power to veto any decision that is made by the Security Council. Now, this Security Council was created along with the United Nations in 1948, just after the Second World War. And these 5 permanent members were the world superpower at that time. They were the victors of the Second World War. And so, they did not adequately represent every country of the world. So most of them belong to both European and North American societies, while most of these third world countries, especially in Africa and most of Asia, were not adequately represented in the Security Council. And as a result of that, most of these third world countries were seeking for the expansion of the permanent membership of the Security Council so that they can take part in the decision-making process, especially when it comes to international peace and security. So this makes option A, expansion of the permanent membership of the Security Council, the answer to this question. Question 48. Which of the following is the function of the Council of the Ministers of the OAU? Option A, coordinating of the general policy of the organization, B, directing the finances of the organization, C, preparing the agenda of the organization's meetings, and D, reviewing the functions and activities of the organs of the organizations. So the answer to this question is option C, preparing the agenda of the organization's meetings. So the Council of Ministers consists of all the foreign ministers from the various countries that belong to the Organization of African Unity. Remember that the OAU was an organization that was created after the independence of the African countries. However, it was eventually changed to the African Union in 2001. But at the time, that Council of Ministers consisted of foreign ministers from each of the countries that belong to the OAU. So they usually come together twice a year, except in some cases where they may have extraordinary meetings that can be called if there is any important issue to be discussed. But this meeting can only be called by 2/3 majority of the foreign ministers that belong to the Council of Ministers. So what they do is that they help to prepare the agenda for the summits, the meetings of the organization. So this summit is the summit of the Assembly of Heads of State and Head of Governments, which is the major organ of the OAU. So they prepare the agenda preparation for the summit. So option C, preparing the agenda of the organization's meetings, is the answer to this question. Question 49. The Economic Community of West African States has made progress in the area of A, free movement of persons and rights of residents, B, increased trade among members, C, political integration of the region, and D, providing financial aid to members. So the answer to this question is option B, increased trade among members. So this is one of the major achievements of the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. So ECOWAS was designed to help to ensure that there is an economic relationship between the various West African states in order to advance the economic systems of each of these countries. And so their major objective was to increase trade among each of these members to ensure that people from each of these ECOWAS countries can move to another country and establish a business there. So this is what is referred to as trade liberalization. They allow people within this ECOWAS community to trade amongst one another, and they also provided certain services such as reduced cost of doing business and reduced tariffs and custom duties to ensure that economic investments and trade continues to go on within these various communities. Free movement of persons and rights of residents is also one of the progress made, but it is not the major one made by ECOWAS. ECOWAS allows the free movement of persons and rights of residents, but this is done in order to increase trade among the members. Remember, it's an economic community. It's about trade, establishing economic relationships. So this free movement helps them in achieving this objective. So they allow members of these ECOWAS countries to move from one country to another as long as they have the important documentation, that's travel documents from their country and health certificates. They are allowed to move freely among each of these ECOWAS countries. So B, increased trade among members, is the progress that has been made by ECOWAS. So option B is the answer to this question. Question 50. Nigeria's departure from pro-West policy during the Murtala Mohammed regime was as a result of A, the economic interest of the West in Nigeria, B, Nigeria's increased international influence, C, the growing trade between Nigeria and the East, and D, Nigeria's concern for decolonization in Africa. So the answer to this question is option D, Nigeria's concern for decolonization in Africa. So during the First Republic, we understand that Nigeria was still trying to maintain relationship with their colonial masters. That means they were trying to preserve the colonial legacy that they inherited from the British people. However, during the military regime of Murtala Mohammed, we began to see a distancing from pro-West policies. That means trying to ensure that Nigeria is distancing itself from its colonial past. So the reason for this is in order to ensure that Africa is completely decolonized. They no longer have that mentality of colonization that was adopted by Africa at the time. So the first thing Murtala Mohammed did in order to ensure that policy change was to support the popular movement for the liberation of Angola. That's the MPLA that was led by Agostinho Neto. So they were trying to ensure that Agostinho Neto won that Angolan civil war that was between so many different factions within the country. So at the time, Portugal was still colonizing Angola, and they were still trying to maintain the power that they had over the Angolan people. But Agostinho Neto was trying to stop this. That was what was going on during the Angolan Civil War. And Nigeria decided to support Agostinho Neto's drive for independence. And that was the first step that Nigeria took towards the decolonization of Africa. So option D, Nigerians' concern for decolonization in Africa, is the answer to this question. I believe you're enjoying this content. If yes, please do not forget to hit the like button, click on the subscribe button, and lastly tap on the notification bell to get informed as soon as we release the next videos.